historic event. So we want to make sure we don't crash the entire internet, but we have compromised. One third of the internet crashing is acceptable for us to be able to get this content to you. So, all right. Hey, enough horsing around. I'm Jay McAllister. I am the founder and CEO of Paragon Tech. We are a legal tech consultancy. What do we help law firms do? We help them to identify constraints, as you will find today. We've had many of those that we've helped identify. So we help law firms to identify those operational constraints in their model, and we solve those by making strategic recommendations to various vendors and consultants out there. We help implement, and we stay on board to actually make sure that the results stick and have the intended effect within the firm. So that is the context of me. I am also I'm also the founder of a organization called Managing Partner Advisors Community, or MPAC for short. We love our acronyms in the legal tech community. And what MPAC is it is an assortment of legal consultants and service providers. We had this theory that there are problems that we cannot solve that our law firm clients face, whether it be staffing, whether it be collections and accounts receivable, whether it be time tracking, whether it be marketing. There are issues that we do not solve, and we wanted to have a vetted roster of individuals who could solve for those. So we founded that. We've been running that for about the last 3 years, and it just so happens that both Katy, Matt, and Jack, who will be on this call as well, are also involved with MPAC. So that's a little bit about me. What you should know is that I've always had the perspective of a skeptic. I just demand real results. Typically, if there's a bill of goods being sold, I'm the one who's going to sniff it out. So that becomes especially valuable in the legal context, because law firms and the practitioners who work within them, they need solutions that will actually drive success in a meaningful way. So my sort of obsession with high performance, whether it be cars, airplanes, motorcycles, and that skeptic view has, I think, allowed me to be able to implement some of those changes in a very effective way. Now, we have a very special format for you today. This is a first of its kind law firm deconstruction. Why do I say first of its kind? Well, as I told my co-panelists here today, it is so that if the format doesn't go as well as we thought, we can tell you that we did tell you this was the first of its kind. Of course, that won't happen. We have about 3 months of preparation that has gone into this. Essentially, what has happened is that I brought on our lovely guest, Katy Young. She's the managing partner of Ad Astra Legal. More on her in a moment. And back in November of 2025, we had a live stream where we identified the operational constraints within her law firm in real time. We took her through the same process that our clients typically go through when they work with Paragon Tech. Now, after that conversation, we found several areas that could be enhanced within her firm, places in the firm that were causing increased operational drag or friction that was stopping the firm from being able to perform at its highest level, right? So we found what those constraints were. We, on the back end, identified potential solutions for those, and those come in the form of two of the panelists that will be on today. It's Matt Darner of Callbox and Jack Weinberger of Ajax. Now, first, before we begin our format today, I just want to let you know this is unscripted. This is definitely organized, but we want to bring you a raw, in-depth, behind-the-scenes view, pulling back the curtains. Nothing is left off the table. So, first of all, I just want to thank Katy for allowing us to take this diagnostic look into her firm. She's been so forthcoming with information and data points, and it's really helped to build what I think will be a valuable program for you all today, the managing partner who's looking to find or enhance their own law firm by identifying those operational constraints. So I really appreciate you. What's that?
Happy to be your guinea pig.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, and speaking of guinea pigs, I'd love to give Katy the ability to provide her own introduction. I will do my best to give you a little context about her, which Katy is the managing partner of Ad Astra Law Group. They are a San Francisco area-based law firm, litigation boutique. One of the things that I've known Katy for quite a while now, and one of the things that I've come to know about her is that she takes a very intentional, she's very intentional about positioning herself and immersing herself in legal technology. She, seems like from the onset of her firm has looked to find ways that she can incorporate technology into her day-to-day practices so that she can, of course, practice at the top of her license as well as the other attorneys in her firm. So she's really looked to build an ecosystem that works very seamlessly. And, that's ultimately what made her such a good guinea pig for us because she had already looked into and analyzed and thought about some of these problems within her firm. So, without further ado, Katy, I'm going to stop blabbering on. Why don't you give the folks a little bit of context about who you are, the firm, and ultimately how we winded up here?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Katy Young. I founded and manage Ad Astra Law Group in San Francisco. We've been around since 2014. We service mostly small and medium sized businesses in the areas of business, employment, real estate, and trademark, all litigation. It's a wild ride every day, but I love being able to provide really high level service to smaller clients with sometimes smaller issues that the big law firms can't touch. But sometimes we go up against the big guys, and there comes in my need for legal technology. So that, we're six lawyers. At one point, we were 10 lawyers, but at this point, we're six, and we're competing with the big guys. Therefore, we need a force multiplier. And it has been a focus of the firm ever since we were founded. We were founded paperless. We started with online practice management software. Everything was in the cloud. And we were kind of at that point in 2014, pretty far ahead of our competition. And we've tried to stay on that curve ever since. Thankfully, I have a office manager who's a little younger, and he's very, very tech forward, and he's constantly pushing me on new products that he finds, so that we can become more efficient, so we can all make more money, which is very nice. And being able to provide our clients a more cost effective service because we have these force multipliers and we're relying on technology in order to compete at a higher level for a lower price. Not that I compete on price with my hourly rate, but with our efficiency, we're able to compete. So it's just been a journey, and it's been really fun to meet Jay and have him kind of walk me through the process, even though like I think I'm doing a pretty good job running the law firm. It's okay for someone to tell me my baby's a little ugly. There are definitely issues that could be addressed, and so it was definitely an eye-opening process to have him kind of deconstruct what's going on with the practice and ask these specific questions about where these pain points are and what we can do to sort of alleviate them by suggesting these technologies that Jay is familiar with out there. So he introduced me to Matt. He introduced me to Jack of Ajax, and it just so happened that at the time that I met Matt, we really, really needed him, which was pretty fantastic. I would have tried it anyways, but we really did need him. So it's been a fun experiment for me to consider, what happened in November and December versus what happened in January, February, having that on my mind as we were going through our working day and trying to determine whether this, alleviated some of those pressure points for us. So thanks, Jay, for having me. Thanks, Matt, for letting me give you a try. Yeah.
Yeah, and this should be fun. So what I'd like to have happen is, Katy, you hold the keys to the kingdom as in terms of you are the managing partner of a successful litigation boutique, and as evidenced by our MPAC practice performance labs, these are quarterly meetings that we have where we actually invite our managing partner clients and referral partners, and we talk through issues that they face within their firm. We've had topics everything from staffing, or sort of eliminating key man syndrome, the managing partner who's looking to elevate, add additional partners or associates to their firm, but you have clients who still insist on reaching out to them directly or working directly with them. So all of these sort of issues sort of manifest, and we talk about these things and solve them. Now, the interesting thing about you, Katy, is that you have the unique lens of being able to analyze this from the perspective of one, sort of a legal tech enthusiast, but also a managing partner. So all of the things that arose throughout this process, of course, talking about communicating the benefit to your staff and helping with change management, as well as sort of how these recommendations landed with you and what your initial thoughts and feedback were both before and after implementing. You have all the answers to this, and we have purposely, I did not want to ask you or interview you before this meeting because I want to get your raw, unfiltered feedback. Also, I just want to say as well, both Matt and Jack have been willing to have a complete, overview of their particular platforms as I've made the recommendations, and they're also willing to have a complete assessment given. We have not. This is not a sponsored segment, right? They haven't paid any money to be able to come here and us promote their platform. Also, at the same time, they are both looking for honest feedback from Katy on how the experience went and whether the platforms were able to alleviate or at least solve some of the issues that we saw within her firm initially. So again, that's just the initial context that you need to understand how and why we're doing what we're doing today. So hopefully you can appreciate that and strap in for the ride. This should be fun. So let's start off first with sort of the identification of the constraints. So the way we look at things when we work with law firms, we found, this is a live audience, so if there were people in front of me, I'd ask you to raise your hand, but I'll still ask you, if you're in your living room or in your law firm office, raise your hand if you have thought about reaching out to a new software vendor based on attending a trade show and being enamored by some functionality that you saw demoed, or you see an ad and you click the ad, and it seems like it's a promising implementation for your firm, and you've thought about reaching out. Right? I've been there myself. Many of the platforms that we use, even internally, we're marketed these platforms, and oftentimes what I find with law firms is that they don't necessarily think about the issue or the constraint that they're looking to solve. They simply get enamored by features or functionality, and they tend to be trigger happy on moving forward with those platforms. And what I'm not suggesting is that additional platforms cannot help your firm. Obviously, today we've made 2 recommendations to some additional platforms. But what I want to impress upon you, the law firm managing partner, is that these recommendations were made as a result of a strategic planning process where we looked at where the operational drag is manifesting in the firm. So we peel back the layers of the onion. Right? So typically you will see symptoms in your firm of a larger issue. And that's typically where we look first when we begin all of our engagements, is determining what those symptoms are, how they're manifesting, the scale or the extent and how they affect the firm, as far as who's being affected. Is it attorneys? Is it associates? Is it support staff, paralegals, admins? What's the time cost associated? What's the operational drag? Is there a decrement on the client experience that's being experienced by having that bottleneck within the firm? That's where we typically tend to start this process from, and we'll explain how we did this with Katy's firm. Then the recommendations come second, because now you have a clear strategic plan to move forward on how to solve this issue in a meaningful way. I'm sure some of you have seen the MIT report that came out at the top of the year, which showed that 95% of AI implementations have stalled. Now, this is not just in respect to the legal profession, this is across all verticals. But the interesting takeaway here is that what we want to focus on is that if you look through that report, you'll see that many of those firms, they never had a clearly defined success criteria in place. So essentially the same problem we're discussing here today. There was no plan. They saw that there was, ChatGPT hit the market, or Claude Code, or OpenClaw, right? They get enamored by the features, implement, only to have that software sit on the shelf. So if you take a step back, which is tough because we're all wired this way, myself, we like new, shiny things. So it's difficult to pump the brakes, first determine what the problem is, determine the scale and scope of that problem, and then put together a strategic plan to solve for it. But I'm telling you, when you do, you'll have results like what we're going to see today. So the first thing we identify within Katy's firm is we asked her very targeted questions about how her firm operates. We asked her about her billing model. We asked her about how she collects her revenues. We asked her about how she drafts her documents. We asked her about how she files those documents. We asked her about how she administers work to others within her firm, right? And holds ultimately folks accountable. So we asked all these targeted questions, and out of this process, 2 noteworthy categories stood out. One, the first category was that we noticed that work that the firm was doing, earned income that the firm created, was not necessarily always being captured accurately, right? So, you don't have to raise your hand for this one, but I'm sure you know of someone who either, if they're especially in an hourly based firm, they tend to capture their time, and they do that at the end of the week, or potentially recreating it at the end of the month, right? And I think Clio has a stat on that. It's something like 30% of time entries are lost if you are recreating them at the end of the week, and something like 60 or 70% of that time is lost if you're inputting at the end of the month. And it makes sense because there's all these small incremental activities that you're performing for your clients that may not necessarily be captured if you're not doing it in real time. Right? Plus, of course, we know the ABA's model rules. They require that if you are an hourly based firm, that you're tracking your time contemporaneously. which is a big word to mean that you have to do it in real time, right?
It is a skill that not every attorney has. And I speak from experience having had partners that could not bill time to save their lives.
I love that you mentioned that. So, Katie, if you could provide a little bit of context, because I know, so in this process, on our first live call that we did way back in November to identify this issue, we decided that we would have a follow-up conversation with her to talk to the individuals in her firm and find out what their billing practices were. So from your perspective, Katie, how did this, before we implemented, before we found that there was potentially this issue related to time capture, how did that feel within the firm? Like, did you have a sort of an inkling or some sort of tip off to you that time may not necessarily being captured in a granular way? Or was it something that was completely, unknown to you?
Most of the time, we thought the time was being captured all the way. There's a couple of billers that wait a day or two where at the end of the month, they have to remind people, hey, it's the end of the month, get your time in. Because I'll track weekly how much we're billing on average per day. And if that looks low, the answer is probably because someone is delaying putting in their time.
Yeah.
But I'll talk about, do you want me to talk about one of the limitations of Ajax that we discovered right away?
Let's save that. Let's
You wanna
keep
save
let's
that?
keep the
Yeah.
folks on the edge of their seat, right? And
Yeah.
they're all going, Jay, no, just give it all to us now. I
Yeah,
think
our
it makes
first
sense to
meeting was
tell this.
eye-opening.
Yeah, we got to tell this story. We got to make sure that you
Yeah.
understand the context around why we did it. So you had an inkling that there may be some time that was captured, but you felt like, or that some time that was not being captured, but you felt like you were doing a pretty good job, especially since even the most late time captures in your firm, they were typically recreating at the end of the day or the 2 days at max, not necessarily waiting longer periods of time.
Well, I'm pretty good at contemporaneous time entry, but I'm aware that I am actually not perfect and I can probably do better. And so I wanted to give it a shot to try technology to see if that could enhance what we're able to bring in because that's really the lifeblood of the firm is those even those little point ones really add up.
Agreed. I would say that, from the standpoint of also of consistency in time entries, I know that that was a conversation that came up as well. Different billers within the firm having different levels of detail that they would include within their narratives associated with those time entries, right? So, it's not enough to just make sure that you're capturing the time appropriately, but to also make sure that the firm is capturing that in a uniform way so that all of the bills look and feel very similar and cohesive so that it reduces the amount of pushback that you have from clients as well as for the firms out there who are looking to petition the court for fees to be reimbursed. Having that consistency in those time entries speeds up that process, let alone if we're talking from a context of like for insurance defense, for example, where maybe you're inputting your bills in a system like time metrics where everything has to be standardized. It becomes very important for these type of things to happen. So from a
Just to jump
consistency
in, Jay,
standpoint.
really fast. I think this,
Okay.
Katie, what you're saying, just to riff on this for 2 seconds, is something we all go through as business owners too, right? Like the problem is like the owners of the business tend to be high performing people with like really high quality bar. The bar is really high for us. And you don't really have to tell us, to work hard and do it right. And that's kind of how we all ended up running businesses to some degree, right? Like at least being kind of how we ended up here. But the one big lesson for me, and I think for everyone here too, is just it's not the same for employees, right? It doesn't mean our employees aren't good, right? We hired them for a reason. We felt that they're awesome and they continue to be awesome. But standards, you're never going to meet the managing partner or the CEO standards ever. Because if we are the owners, right? Because we're just insane, I think. No, just have some fun with it, but like a little bit crazy, right? Like I think is
You have to
how you
be.
end up here, right?
Yeah.
Like a lot of it, right? And and tooling of any kind, I think, to enforce or enforce is even a strong word, but just help the employees maintain sort of that uniform standard across the bar is this is just goes so far beyond legal even or billing or any one topic, but this is a struggle too. Like we recently started expanding our sales team. I won't riff too long on this, but I'm now in the place of like, ooh, not founder led sales anymore, right? On everything. Whoa, we got what are our SOPs? Have we done? Obviously, we have some
Mhm.
processes, but it really starts to get challenged, right? Every time you let go, and you're a little bit bigger, and you have 6 attorneys, right? But you've been going through this for a while. But just what you said really resonated in the sense of like, yeah, it's not it's not our standards usually that are the issue as owners,
Right.
because we have all the incentives to get it right as an owner, right? It's
Totally.
everyone else, and it doesn't mean they're not trying. It's just everyone's got a different style, but it's not your baby, ugly or otherwise. I'm kidding. No,
Right.
but I love that. I love
Well,
that.
that reminds me of Michael Gerber's book, The E-Myth. And there's
Yeah.
even a E-Myth for attorneys. And that is the concept that, like, you need to be providing consistent service. Law firms are a service industry, you know, and for the hourly rate that we charge, my clients expect total professionalism. If we screw up the billing, they get really, really upset because it feels like we're being reckless with their funds.
Right.
Oh
So
yeah,
it causes
I would
downstream
imagine. I mean,
stuff we'll talk about
like
later. Right? So on collections.
Yeah.
we had a client who, the catalyst reason for them retaining Paragon is that they tried to set up some workflows to handle the lead nurture process, right? So a new lead comes in the firm, whether it be through an online form or through a referral source, and you want to make sure that you stay within their orbit, right? And you provide value to them on an ongoing basis until the point where they're ready to then hire. Well, the reason they hired Paragon is because they tried to create some workflows to handle that process, and they accidentally sent out a lead nurture email to that client based on a completely different type of matter, which was very different than the matter that they tried to reach out to the firm for in the beginning, and it was actually very off-putting to that client because of the nature of the work that this firm did. So it becomes that level of professionalism. The bar is so high, right? And again, you're talking about billing. Let's face it, legal services are expensive. And the World Justice Project, they found that in their 2024 report, 70% of all legal needs are currently unmet. The reason for that is because of the fact that they're expensive and clients just don't trust their attorneys, right? One of the biggest bar complaints is for unethical billing practices or the attorney not being properly keeping their communication with their clients. So if we can do things to enhance that process and reduce the friction, it allows the clients to then let down their guard. And of course, then you have a much more valuable service, which means you get to bill more for it. And that's totally ethical and it's totally responsible. And I believe it's the way to go. Right. So, and the topic of the firm getting paid is that's really the through line that captures both of those things that we found. It's both on the time capture portion and that not being done in a uniform fashion, but then also on the back end of that when it comes to collections. When we looked at the firm and we looked at their total accounts receivable, it was fairly high, right? And we were looking at bills that were unpaid.
Accounts receivable that is our biggest pain point. Absolutely.
And and of course it's difficult for a firm like yours, especially when you're a litigation firm, because you have clients who are going through very difficult situations, and it's obviously expensive, and they may be in a place where the financials are not necessarily where they'd like them to be, but ultimately these clients are looking for adequate and adept legal representation, and that costs money. So, what we found when we asked you targeted questions about that, and I would love to hear your feedback about, how this manifested within your firm. But what we found is that obviously the accounts receivable process, the process of getting paid, it was largely manual, right? There was a lot of nuance around when you should reach out to clients, how often you should do it, if there's any specifics, idiosyncrasies with this client, hey, don't reach out with this, or hey, leave this note there, but a lot of it was communicated verbally. So can you talk about the accounts receivable one, how, ultimately what the, how that problem manifested in a real way within your firm initially before we implemented these great solutions to solve for it?
Well, as you said, it was a very manual process. I had to pay a whole human to input data about our clients' billing and follow up with it. And every week we have a partnership meeting on Tuesday afternoon, and I go through the accounts receivable report with my office manager and that employee. And we mark on the spreadsheet who to reach out to by email, who to send just a reminder from the software from, who to give an actual call to, and that sort of breakdown so that the information gets conveyed. And so there was a lot of verbal, hey, make sure that you call that person instead of email them, that sort of thing. But there was also us writing down on a spreadsheet every week what the instruction is to reach out to that client. But, I pay a whole human to do this, and that human has other things to do as well. And so, the rest of the week might go by and she hasn't gotten to reaching out to those people that I said to reach out to. She hasn't made those phone calls yet. And then before you know it, we've rolled into the next week and here we are again. And I get really frustrated because I'm looking at the spreadsheet and nothing's changing. Right. But also, I understand that there's all these other demands on their time. And so, without me saying, hey, let's reprioritize what you're doing and put this in front, or, saying, like, I really don't want to see these entries on the spreadsheet again next week. Please. I get so sick of seeing it. So that was that was how we were working. And then the human that I paid went out on maternity leave. And so we were in a spot where we really did need someone to follow up. And so Jay introduced us to Callbox. And, at one point, I was paying San Francisco prices for an actual human to sit in my office and do this work. We've since transitioned to a virtual assistant who's a law student in the Philippines, and she's a lot cheaper. But then Callbox is a third of that and did pretty much the same service that our whole human was doing, which was pretty great. But it highlighted some other operational problems that we have in order to make Callbox work the way that it should. That high touch process that I had with my staff, where we're in contact every week about what to do, and frankly, we're chatting all the time. That worked a little bit better because in that meeting where we were doing the high touch thing, the staff was also able to see whether the client had already paid. Even if that wasn't entered into Clio yet. And so the rub that we found with Callbox is that if we did not update Clio fast enough, then Callbox would contact our clients and say, hey, you need to pay this bill. And they would be like, bro, I paid the bill like 3 days ago and it just hasn't been entered yet. That's on us, right? And so that was sort of the trade-off. It's like, all right, well, I can pay this whole human to follow me during the week about whether this person's paid or not, because we do get emails from the payment software when it gets paid, or if they pay by ACH, we check that every day to see what comes in. Wires, we try and match up, who it was or whatever, but we usually do need to verify with each other, so-and-so paid, correct? And then we go enter it in the software. And so Callbox is a step ahead of us is sort of the issue. And so I realized that in order to really make Callbox function the best that it can, that my staff needs to tighten up.
Yeah.
Our practices need to tighten up.
And I think that's a great point that you bring up. Whenever it comes to pretty much any sort of improvement to either your workflows, your processes of your firm, or your technology, it requires that you up-level your standard operating procedures. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is there are many of the processes that we currently have in place, the ones that rely on manual conversations or follow-ups or notes or, hey, knock on the person's door to remind them, many of those are crutches, right? They are sort of the manifestations of a process that really is broken, but it's worked so far. And it's one of those scenarios where what got you there to where you are will not necessarily be the thing that gets you to where you need to go. And I found that out firsthand. I mean, there's a company, Shift 6 OS, they're a virtual staffing company for law firms. When I was looking to implement a virtual assistant, I realized that I was unable to do so at the time where I wanted to, because so much of the things that I needed the administrative assistance with were manual processes that I was doing that were sort of codified in my own head. But I needed to have that codified and documented and written out. So the point you bring up, Katie, of needing to tighten up your operations and make sure information's entered in a timely fashion. These are things that ultimately, yes, up front, they may seem like they're a little bit of a headache or a challenge, but that's because it's masking, you operating in a smaller, lower scale way of operation. But when you rely on the systems and use them in the way that they're intended, now it opens up the field for you to be able to do some really interesting things and scale up your operation. So I think that's a really good transition into Matt Darner. I'd like to be able to provide some feedback on and from some context from Matt's perspective on Callbox. So just if you're keeping track with where we're at now, we identified the two issues, both the time capture and the consistency of doing that, as well as the urgency of getting that entered in an immediate fashion, and then also collections and being able to make sure that work that the firm had done, the firm was getting paid on. So
And being consistent with how we reach out about collections and that sort of thing. And that was something that Callbox was really good at.
yeah.
Appreciate
So
those feedback.
so what I'd like to do is, based on these two constraints that we had, what we did off camera, this all happened during our last meeting, the live stream. But what we did off camera is that we had scheduled conversations with Katy's staff. We talked about them further about these issues to confirm that these were actually manifesting in a real way that was causing operational drag in the firm, which it so happened that that was the case. What we then did is internally we have a matrix that we run all of the issues that we identify, all of the issues that we run across into, and that matrix ultimately through the software that we built as well as the expertise of our staff, it essentially outputs a list of recommendations for how we should solve those issues. Sometimes those recommendations are changes to the process that's in place. Sometimes it's integrating systems together that are already existing within the firm, and sometimes it's adding new systems which will be able to be leveraged in order to handle some sort of functionality requirement that the firm has. In this case, the output was, in fact, two new platforms that the firm was not using, one being Ajax for the automated time capture component, and then the other being Callbox. And Callbox would handle the accounts receivable and collections process. Now, I basically what I did off camera with Katy is I made these recommendations to her. She okayed them, talked to her staff. They gave it the green light. Then I introduced them to Matt. So that brings us now to Matt and Callbox. So what you should know about Matt is that he is in fact the co-founder of Callbox. He's one of the most outspoken voices in legal collections and accounts receivable. He's built his reputation around a simple but powerful, some even say controversial idea, is that lawyers should actually get paid for the work that they do.
No
right?
way.
I know. I'm a target of a lot of hate and a lot. No.
Yeah, listen. We're gonna we'll put you on witness protection right after this call to make sure that you can remain safe. And one thing about Matt that I also wanted to highlight is that recently he's just made a major milestone, which is that they have collected $100 million in unpaid invoices to date. So that's pretty cool. So nice job, Matt, with that. So give us the spread on exactly what Callbox was designed to solve, the problem that it solved, and then ultimately how you interface with Katy. And then let's get into some of the data and the metrics on the time that we began working with Katy back from November, which is our comparison period, to then January and February of 2026, which was our testing periods where we implemented the platform for that 60-day period of time, and see what the results are.
Totally. Yeah. Thanks for having me. And Katy, thanks for working with us. And yeah, I love this format. I know for those who know me, I'm a pretty candid guy. I'm not very good at scripting anything. I don't like preparing. No, I'm kidding. No, but if you talked to me before the ABA Tech Show pitch, that's maybe the most prepared I was. But that was where we debuted the line, like, lawyers deserve to get paid. What a controversial concept. But yeah.
Yeah, and didn't you win that as well? The ABA Tech Show Startup Alley?
Yeah, we did. This year we took home first place.
Our booth was right next to it. Matt was the only person that got out loud cheers.
That's right. Yeah, and so Matt Darner, co-founder, CEO of Callbox, yeah, literally built to make law firms' lives easier by getting them paid for their work. I feel, anyone who's practicing or has ever practiced or even works with attorneys knows, I think that there's something deeply woven into the culture of attorneys and legal professionals that makes collections difficult, right? They don't like following up with their clients. That's not what we do a lot of marketing on this. No one went to law school to be a bill collector, but I would add, Katy highlighted this perfectly. No one joined a law firm to be a bill collector either, most of the time. And what we see in that we focus on small to mid-sized firms, that's the world we live in. We're not working with big law, like they've got unlimited bodies most of the time to throw it at these sort of issues, efficiently or not, is that the little guys like us, we're a small business. Everyone wears multiple hats. Katy called this out perfectly early on, in that the act of collecting, staying on top of the AR, chasing the client, not only knowing who owes what, but following up with them consistently, persistently. That's one of many hats that person was wearing, right? And this is exactly the issue, right? And what we built this to solve. But Katy also, I think brought up some really great points about when things kind of don't always go perfectly with us too. And I do want to lean into those and talk about those, because I think that those were some interesting points, and it kind of validates some of my theories of where we're headed at Callbox too. But at the end of the day, the quick kind of technical pitch is we plug in with practice management systems. We detect automatically when the bills that you've issued start to go past due, and then we begin follow-up. Unlike a pure tech company, I've taken a very weird and different approach to this, but I think it's necessary for what we really ultimately want to build. And that is, we have our flavor of email reminders, automated follow-up. We're adding more and more to that. And there's areas we need to improve on that we don't have today, which we'll talk about. But what we've done that's very unique is I've hired and trained and built a team of accounts receivable experts that have been AR managers, AR clerks, collection specialists. That was their sole role. That is how they're wired. They're built for that. But my vision is that 90% of law firms don't have 40 hours a week of that work specifically. So then naturally, a generalist inside the firm has to do that. And it doesn't go well, right? For a lot of reasons. They don't like doing it is the number one reason most of the time. And as Katy pointed out, things come up and then the consistency falls through the cracks. So what we try to do is bring the cadence, right? The consistency, the system, the accounts receivable workflow, if you will, right? For this, that the big law firms have, but bring that down to the small to mid-sized guys, but not lose the human touch. I have other reasons for this, which we can riff on another time, but we are measuring what calls are more effective, how many touches, what's said, the outcomes. And look, in time, we started this before AI popped, right? But it's not lost on us that there is an opportunity to automate more and more of this in the future. But my style is, I think we need to preserve the dignity and the empathy for our clients, particularly those in consumer law, but not just, that may be going through one of the hardest times in their entire lives. And so we need to tailor our solutions around not just extracting maximum dollars, right? That's not going to be good for anybody, but actually, again, high empathy, very friendly, very white glove. And we use, I don't know if we touched on this, but Katy, you've talked about some offshoring, things like that. You mentioned that we were significantly cheaper than an offshore asset. We use all North American talent that are all native English speakers, all trained in accounts receivable. And most of those are right here in Austin, Texas. We do have some reps in Mexico because we work with Spanish speaking firms. So, but generally speaking, US based native English speakers, trained in AR. So it's a little bit more like a tech enabled service, right, at this stage of the company. But I think that's the right way of it for now. We'll see. Robots will take over everything, I'm sure, eventually. But for now, we'll be friendly and human now. But that's sort of the quick pitch. But yeah, Jay, you want to get into some stats and things like that?
Yeah, I'd love to talk about, so from your perspective, this is where it gets fun. So from your perspective, Katy, I'd like to, as Matt sort of overviews the onboarding process, I'd like for you to give some additional context from your perspective. For those watching, what you should know about Paragon and our role in all of this. It's how do you guys interface with this? Obviously, we make the recommendation, but then we sort of act as a liaison and the quarterback between the various vendors to ensure that all the staff are properly onboarded within the firm, and to ensure that if there's any questions or issues or support that the firm needs, we will handle that or route that appropriately if it's something that needs to be handled internally within the platform. So from your perspective, Katy, I'd like you to give some context about how the overall onboarding process went, what it felt like. Again, we're all coming to this conversation with the perspective of providing the raw, unfiltered guidance. So give your full feedback unadulterated on that, as well as let's start to get into some stats around the what actually happened from a perspective, of course, of I want to talk about from the perspective of sort of the sort of less tangible components for you, Katy. What do you believe how was the client experience affected? Obviously from a dollars and cents perspective, we want to talk about how much was collected during that period versus comparison beforehand. But yeah, so let's. I think that'll give us a good starting point to begin the conversation.
Sure. So the onboarding process was really easy and kind of felt the same way as the manual process that we had been going through, that instead of talking to my assistant, I was filling in callbox on the story with each client. You get to customize it and say, don't reach out to this person, and then tell it why. Either they're a friend of the firm or the case is something's going on with the case, or there's like a drop down list of reasons you can choose not to reach out to that person. And then those that you do want them to reach out to, you can fill in, the details about what's going on with that person. And so it didn't take me very long to get it going. Hooking it up to Clio was super simple. I got definitely the white glove service with Matt, but I imagine that the onboarding process is the same with everybody. And so it took me maybe a half an hour to get it all set up, and then it was very high touch as we went along. As Matt said, definitely white glove service. And so instead of me having to repeat myself every week to my assistant about what I want them to do, Callbox went ahead and did it for me. And if there was any issue, a real human would reach out to me. Apparently, someone that's in Austin, Texas, with AR experience would reach out to me and say, "Hey, this is what the client said, or what's the story with this?" And so, from my perspective, it was very seamless, because it was, instead of talking to my assistant, I was talking to someone who's more skilled than my assistant and solely dedicated to collecting these ARs. So that was really nice, really nice. What else did you want me to hit on?
I think so let's hear from you, Matt. So ultimately, how was how did the process go of getting the firm? How long did that take to get them fully onboarded? And then we can get into the metrics.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we had any particular delays, Katie. I think you felt the same on that. I think actually when we all first met, we just decided to start you a few weeks in advance, right? Or later, sorry. We kind of said, hey, this is the go live date. So in that way, that went very well. Sometimes when firms get really excited, they say, all right, let's start. And then they're not quite as prepared as Katie was, and kind of knocked it out. Our onboarding, like I said, the settings take, 15 to 30 minutes. We do an onboarding live every time. So we assign a dedicated rep too. I didn't mention that earlier. So it is that trained and AR, US based person, but they lead the onboarding also. And that's going to be the dedicated rep for the firm. So Katie, what you experienced is true for everyone, and that, that's your person. Obviously, there's redundancy for sickness, vacations, things like that, but we really try to keep it linked. And so that when you do like a brain dump, like this is our process, these are my preferences, we try to capture as much of that in software as we can, right? And then, there's more to do on that always. But just having your guy, I think you worked with Keegan, I want to say, on our team.
Yeah, he was great. It was nice to know that I could email him and, reach someone that has a logical brain right away that could do something. Because it was, your blend is technology, but then with a high touch human element to it.
Yeah, and Keegan, we gave you a little bit. He who leads the team, so you got kind of the best one. No, but I'm just kidding. They're all amazing. I'm sorry, whoever's watching this. No, but Keegan's been with us since the beginning, helped build that team, and so he is amazing. But he actively works with clients still all the time, so he carries his own kind of portfolio of clients, and then that's the way we do it. Most of our reps can handle about 10 to 20 law firms at a time, depending on the billing volume and things like that. So, yeah, I don't know. I guess I just felt like we chased it pretty organically. Of like, there's stuff software can't capture yet, or without going to some insane degree of like capturing of settings and stats and things like that. And yeah, it's just nice to have your person too, kind of almost like your account manager meets your person making the calls. There are downsides though, right? We have to load balance them really carefully. Keegan has been through all of that too, and been like, I'm dying, you need to hire more, Matt, and so that's been like our journey and challenge, right? So we have some staffing things, but we always want to grow and keep that moving. But yeah, I think stats wise, getting into the numbers, this is interesting. So I'm pretty candid with this. We talk about it on sales consults all the time. Our approach thus far has been to not institute new payment methods, right? So Katie, we used exactly what you had on file. I can't recall if you were on Clio Payments or Law Pay or something different. Can you
Clio Payments, yeah.
Clio Payments, right? Which is, look, when they click and pay that link and it reconciles, which we talked about a little bit earlier, like we love that, you love that, like there's a lot of wins there. So we recommend using the built-in ones. And that's because, as Katie highlighted earlier, we want the most up-to-the-minute information on who's paid and who hasn't paid as we can get. And when payment application drags, it definitely can cause some friction. We try our best by being so friendly and white glove that no one's coming in guns blazing to the clients. But there are clients who can get very touchy about that, right? And it can cause friction. And so it just happens, right? And so we're always thinking like, how can we do that? But all that to say, because there's no call box pay or anything like that. We've threatened to do it. We're thinking about it. Sometimes there would be some advantages, but as a business owner, I feel like asking you to like roll a new payment method is sort of annoying. It's something, since we're, I know this is sort of a candid feedback session, right? We're struggling with like, should we build our own? Because the advantages would be we can do more interesting reporting, we can do more accurate things. I guess the main thing I wanted to share is because we use your payment links, when we talk about the stats I'm going to share, I think that we are sort of limited in that we can say this is the amount of what we touched that got marked paid after we touched it, right? So for those listening, like, it's not a callbox specific payment link where I can say with 100% accuracy, we transacted that from our email because it was our custom payment link on callbox pay or, some fictional thing. Well, we use Clio payment links or LawPay or whatever you tell us to. And that's, I think, has a lot of benefits. But when we talk about these stats, and that's why I want your raw feedback on this, Katy, some firms can just in transparency say, I don't know, did you really collect all of that call box? And it's like, but we try to be really transparent in the front and say, we're only showing what we touched that got marked paid after we touched it. If you get paid on time or early or during a grace period, we certainly don't take any credit for that. But it's one of the challenges of the business, right? Is like, I've made the decision so far to make it easier for you to get started, but it's actually made it somewhat harder for us to show like a crystal clear ROI sometimes. And time will tell if I was right, on that. But getting into the stats and looking at what we did together. So as mentioned, I'm going to go back off screen here. I've got our monthly progress report. I think officially, Katy, launched in December, but that was sort of a partial month. We were just getting ramped up. It looks like we contributed a little under $18,000 in recovery that month. And then there was a huge pop, which tends to happen in the first full month. January looks like it was a little over, it was 112,000 that we contributed towards. And in February, almost 180,000, 179 and some change. And then March, which was our final month together on this project, I think was 117,920. So just shy of 118,000. Cumulatively, we're measuring a little over $469,000 that we helped push forward. And then in the aggregate, we made, it looks like 69 phone calls in that time, over 400 emails sent, and then general time kind of saved as a metric. We kind of estimate how much time you would have spent doing the same, about 46 and a half hours.
Yeah, we don't have time for 400 emails.
Right. Some are automated, but a lot aren't, right? In the sense like that when there's custom feedback that needs to go out and do that touch, depends on how the clients want to react to. Like, it's funny, but the phone calls from a human, like that are persistent, really seem to make the biggest difference. I always say, like, if automated emails were enough, we wish we wouldn't have a business, right? Like, clearly that wouldn't have been the thing. We have our flavor of that, and we have, very, I think, smart and interesting ways we go about that are different than what's built into the practice management systems. But I do think layering in the phone call and having an intelligent cadence around that is also really important. Bringing the cadence is maybe arguably one of the most important things. Because Katy, you called it out, and this is something we don't do, but you saying it just like fires me up more. That weekly meeting inside of a spreadsheet of like, who are they on track? What was the last payment? What do we do next? That's not something Callbox does yet, but I think for me, it's like, we kind of want to become your AR module, right? Like your AR meeting run off of Callbox. Like, that's riffing into the future, but what you're saying, I see as a real limitation, but / opportunity for us to grow and drive more value for you guys.
Okay.
So what do you think about those stats though, too? Jay, if you don't mind me just asking, I know it's sort of setting myself up. Do you agree? No, because the
yeah, exactly. It's like, well, yeah, I think it's all fake. So next, moving on.
Whoops.
No. These are obviously impressive numbers. Like you said, to be able to, and this is how it goes anytime you're doing any sort of ROI calculation. It's difficult to gain an exact, to provide a delineation between the before and the after, but that's why we collected it in a uniform fashion. That's how I had both you and Jack collect the data in a way that would allow us to provide the most comparable data set so we could actually see what the effect was, right? There's of course going to be a little fuzziness there, but I think it's representatively we can see there was a large amount of work and and difference from the before versus the after that was happening. So I think I'd love to go in even deeper. Obviously, from time constraint perspective, we'll have to keep moving. But I would say, in closing out on this particular portion, Katy, I'd like to know from your perspective, especially for the benefit of the other managing partners here, how did your clients react to getting emails from another party that is not, at Astra Law Group, not the individual that they're typically used to working with? As you mentioned, the whole human that you were paying to perform all of your AR accounts receivable actions. What was that like?
I think there's a real psychological difference for the client in receiving a phone call from a third party that, like, no one wants to get a bill from a collector, right? And they get an actual human on the phone who knows what to say. And then there's that societal pressure that most people experience where they're like, oh, damn, I know I owe this money. Now I got to talk to this person and give them my excuse. This doesn't feel good. And so we did collect more on late bills. Those people might have paid anyways, but I think they probably paid sooner because they did get contact and have to explain themselves to someone that's not us. Because if we call, especially the crazy ones, I try and avoid crazy clients, but there are some, if we call, they're going to rant at us about the bill. Whereas with this third party, I think most people understood, like, oh, these people are not in charge of the invoice. They're just looking at collecting. And so there were some times where Keegan would contact me and say, hey, this person's complaining about the bill. And then I would take it from there. But that's the same process we would have done within the law firm. So I do think it was more effective to have someone that's not us. Because also at that point, like, our clients were used to getting the automated emails from Clio. And so when you start hearing from someone else, that seems like it was lighting a fire under them a little bit more.
Yeah.
That's interesting feedback. We on the phones we will represent as a member of the team, just from like what we call a first party perspective. But I do think the ranting thing is funny that you mentioned. It's like it's hard to put on a bullet point on a feature slide when you're like, well, we'll kind of take the hits for you if they are there. Some people are like, you deal with this, and it's interesting because there's a lot of Katy, you mentioned the psychological component of this. Like, the goal is not to like shame anybody exactly or make them feel bad. But the persistence, which I think the internal team members, it falls through the cracks. They get busy. This is no slight to any staff out there listening who are doing it. Like, I know what you're going through, but I think that when there's a big legal case next week or a major project or priority, the regular scheduled phone calls are absolutely the first thing that go out the door, especially if you don't particularly like doing them, right? Which is most people. And so that's where I think a lot of the value is. It's a little harder to quantify, but Katy, I appreciate that we got a chance to talk stats and that you felt that there was a meaningful improvement. What you said about time to get paid is in fact true. We measure that across the client base, and right now we're seeing an average of 40% faster in time to get paid.
I believe it.
And we could riff on this another. I know we're running up against time. I just want to have a quick shout out to the Clio team on their legal trends report. So we talked about this a lot earlier in the call. Of course, they have great benchmarks on like utilization, realization, collection rates. But what they introduced in 2023, which is just coincidentally the year we integrated with Clio and launched into this space, and I was like a kid in a candy store. They introduced lockup as a metric that I like bang this drum all the time. I know Jack probably does too, because he's the other side of it. In that, there's realization lockup, the amount of time it takes a firm to get the bill out the door, right? Which is critical. And averaging right now, I think I just had this stat up. I'll try to pull it back up quickly. The average realization lockup right now for law firms looks like it's over a month right now. It's taking an average of over a month to get the bills out the door, right? That's, for me, that's like, you can't get paid unless you ask to be paid. And the way you
how does anyone make money?
Yeah, well, turns out they don't actually. No, I'm kidding. It's really hard. And so, for us, that's realization lockup is obviously inextricably tied to what we do. But collections lockup, right, is the other term they introduced, which was near and dear to my heart. And I think right now, I'm trying to pull this up. I just had the stat. Oh, here we go. So 32 days for realization lockup on average, and 43 days on average for collections lockup. So the time to get paid after that. There was a slightly different calculation where they took a lot more into consideration. But basically, when you look at it as a whole, it's an average of 93 days to get paid for the work you're doing right now.
No.
And so, not true, I think, on Katie's perspective, and this is why content like this is so important. But I always like to shout out like Joshua Lennon and their team for building that report, updating it every year. We use that so often in our consultations and our own marketing. And I've met with Joshua, and he's awesome. And I just feel like that information is something that firms are not tracking. So I'll get off my soapbox, but as a KPI that almost no one tracks, like we all look at our collection rate, right? And I think attorneys, not Katie, but like generally get lulled into a false sense of confidence of like, I'm in the 90s, like 89, 92%, which is benchmark, doing pretty good. Well, how long did it take you to get paid for that 92%? How much of it did you write down actually?
Yeah.
You know, like, so there's more to the story, but that's my soapbox on that. It's just like a big KPI, set of KPIs that people really need to be measuring.
Yeah, I'll second that too. And if you have not taken a chance to look at the legal trends report, you should. They actually typically do a small solo firm report as well as a mid-market report as Clio has moved further up market each passing year. So definitely check it out. Good stuff, and good shout out to the team over there. Keep doing what you're doing. It enables us to have really interesting conversations like this. All right, so let's
Most
move.
people would rather talk about sex than money. So good job, Matt.
Listen, I didn't say we weren't.
I'm already long since married. I'm doing great. Got kids. So that's fine. You know. I also had more hair before I started an AR company. I'm just like off the deep end.
No, to your point, no one likes to talk about money. It's too hard to do it with my clients because of the relationship. And so outsourcing that has been better on my psyche, not only the firm's recovery time and how much we're collecting, but also it's something off my plate because it's not me having that difficult conversation. I have plenty of difficult conversations all day long.
Well, it's funny you say that, and I know we got to switch over to the billing side, but so we did win, the ABA Tech Show, Startup Alley, and there was a couple of videos that spun out of it. One was the great guys at Lunch Hour Legal Marketing, that podcast, Guy and Conrad, and they were kind of just, here are the startups, here's what happened, the winner, and then when they got to us talking about the winner, I think Conrad was like, I think we were talking about how we'd rather fire someone than actually do collections work, and they were talking about how because at least that ends, right? Well, it was really unpleasant, but I feel better afterwards, and it's over instead of this prolonged thing. And then Joshua Lennon also was on with Damien. They sponsor the Startup Alley every year, Clio does, and they were talking about us, and I think Joshua cited a study maybe that he was a part of, or at least they had done, that there was a quote from a managing partner that said, my attorneys would rather spend a whole afternoon billing, the equivalent of $2,000 in new billables than make one phone call to a client who owes $10,000, right?
Yeah.
And you just think about the interchange of value right there. Well, I guess that's it, right? So it's all validation, it's all crazy, but we're here for you guys, I guess.
So in other words, it's like, listen, I'm not going to tell you have to use Callbox, but at least make sure you outsource the function and decouple it from the attorney who's actually performing the work, right? Because that's just awkward, experience for everyone. So
it's a utilization crisis too, to talk about serious stats, like Katie, you don't have to share your effective rate, your hourly rate. I notice I show as effective rate. So your hourly rate as distinct from your effective rate, it's a utilization crisis. If the attorneys or billable staff are doing this work, I'm a huge, opponent of that. And, certainly better than you guys, let's do it on, operations, team members, assistants, things like that. But then you get into that training and, wearing too many hats, which we already talked about. So yeah, I think you can cannibalize your hourly rate real quick by, doing all kinds of admin. But then you have the emotional weight Katie talked about of now I'm losing hourly rate, my hourly rate or billable hours, and I feel terrible. So yeah, not a good combo.
Yeah.
You know what is good combo though? You guys, I made more money in January and February. Let's talk about that.
Yeah. Hey, and like I mentioned, guys, this is not sponsored. This is all raw, unfiltered, unscripted. So I think we've left Jack on the edge of his seat long enough. So I would like to introduce Jack as far as the second component, the pillar that we solved for, which was on the billing capture, the time capture side of things. So as you remember, that was the constraint that we identified within the firm. We looked to deconstrain the firm. So I made the recommendation to Ajax. Funny enough, we had previously been using another vendor for all of our automated time capture activities. And through various trade shows like Tech Show that I had kept running into Jack at, and CleoCon. We decided to give it a spin, and it was funny because he was very persistent to get us in a demo, and I'm like, we're good, got it. Finally got us in a demo, and I'm like, we have to go back and re-recommend this to all of our existing clients because of the way they capture the data, the way they organize it, the way they group it. It's just superior to everything we've seen. So I would like to introduce Jack. He's the co-founder of Ajax, which he started with his brother Alex. He has a very unique perspective on the problem of time capture and entry. I had a family member that was going through the process of entering time, and he just saw him and his brother saw it was so inconvenient to do so, capture it. So they thought they could do something about it. They saw how painful it was and broken the timekeeping process can be, specifically when it comes to legal practitioners. So that's a big part of what made his story compelling. And so Ajax was built out of a desire to solve real-world problems affecting lawyers and their families. And of course, Jack's been focusing on helping firms capture more billable work without forcing attorneys to interrupt their flow to record time entries, which I know all of you attorneys love to do. So Jack, without further ado, if you could provide a little bit better of a briefing on who you are, your attachment to the issue, and then ultimately how you came about to help Katy's firm.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for teaming me up. It is good to be here. So you're exactly right. In terms of one, I was very persistent. I thought you were blowing me off for about 4 months, but I knew that if we kept after you and you actually saw how Ajax worked, you would like it. So my parents were both lawyers back in the day. My dad worked at Cravath. My mom was a divorce lawyer for a bunch of years. She's still a divorce mediator. And they warned me not to be a lawyer, if we're being honest. So I went a very different route. I was in finance. I was working in private equity. My brother at the time, he is technical. So he was working at Amazon as a distributed systems engineer. And then he was at a startup himself as a founding engineer. And one day we were just sitting there and we watched his girlfriend, now fiance, Alana, doing her time in tap time, which, if you're familiar, is what a lot of big law firms use to track their time. And we just watched her for an hour and 15 minutes of this extremely painstaking process of scraping through her outbox and then looking at her call logs and her calendar and just translating it all one by one for the previous week, with her boss breathing down her neck because it was like Tuesday evening and she hadn't gotten her hours in for the prior week yet. And it's like, we're just sitting there watching her do this. And we're like, this is about the worst use of a smart human being's time that we've ever seen. Like, we just have to be able to do better than this. This was right around the time that ChatGPT launched. So we knew that there were tools out there that now were made, at least in concept, possible to track your time. And so we were just like, okay, we'll quit our jobs. We will start Ajax. We'll figure it out from there. And that's what we did. So that was 2023. It's, spoiler alert, it's not that easy to track lawyers' time effectively, capture every minute, make sure it's written the way you want, make sure you're billing the correct clients and not the incorrect clients, you're showing the stuff you want to show, you're hiding the stuff you want to hide. And so it took us a year and a half to get this right, to be honest. But we caught fire in early 2025. And since there, it's just been, grown from basically 0 firms to 140 firms and counting. And people seem to like it. So what Ajax is, super briefly, is an app that sits on your computer, watches what's happening on your screen. So that's pixel by pixel, window by window. As you go, it just watches a little video of what you're actually up to, captures the words on your screen, figures out based off of those words what people you're talking to, what cases you're talking about, what key companies, email addresses, street addresses, whatever other operative keywords it can use to key in on the correct matter from your billing system, group it with any other related work for that matter from earlier in the day. And Jay, I think that's the key distinction to what we sort of did better relative to the previous billing system AI timekeeping system you had checked out, is that thoughtful grouping and presentation. And then give it to you in a format where you can very easily edit it and push it into your billing system, in Katy's case, Clio. That's what we sort of presented to Katy in January, and we are still having you and a couple of your people at your firm use it. You want to give us your experience with Ajax?
Love it. It's been So wonderful. I was a very good biller. We talked earlier in the conversation about, the managing partner is usually never the problem with the billing. Maybe that's something you see, but for us, I'm the highest performer, so I was always good at it. But I would have to do the task, turn to Clio, da da da, do a task, turn to Clio, and so now I can zoom through my task list a lot faster, and then spend 5 minutes every couple of hours, not even 5 minutes. It takes me 5 minutes if I wait all day and I haven't checked Ajax and I haven't refined my time. It'll take me 5 minutes at the end of the day to organize what happened. But if I check it every hour or two, it's just click, click, click. So simple. I think we have captured more time. I know we've captured more time, and a lot of that I do bill. Some of it I have, just discounted, and it makes the client feel all warm and fuzzy that, we're discounting what looks like more time, but it was time that we wouldn't have captured anyways. And so that's been really helpful. My staff loves it. They asked me specifically, we're not going to take away that software, are we? And I was like, no, we're going to keep it. It's great. And then it learns too. And so it was, when it first started, it was way more manual, teaching the system and having it learn off of, how I correct it. It'll, read what I'm doing. It'll suggest that it belongs to a particular case. And I'd say 90% of the time it's right. The grouping is really smart as well. And I'd say probably 90% of the time it's accurate. Every now and then when I read through it, there'll be a line item in there that belongs to a different case. And then like Jack and I have worked on, where I've noticed that there's little bugs, I'll reach out to him about it, and we can see how the system got confused. Often there's like a common word or a common name or something that it'll pick up. And so if you understand how AI works, it's not annoying. I'm just like, oh, I can see why that happened. And then I just have to, cut, paste, move it over really quick. And then it's gotten more and more accurate over time. And I've also gotten better at using it over time. And so my return on it has been pretty great.
Okay. Katy, explain it, like, how does the work, because I would imagine that the other managing partners watching, they might be sort of, we're talking about this conceptually, but can you explain just very briefly, and we'll obviously make sure we're good on time, can you explain briefly how the workflow changed for you and how you ultimately interface with Clio and Ajax, as well as your staff? How do they sort of prefer to interface with it?
So I used to have Clio up all day, and I would toggle between whatever I was doing and Clio. And so I just changed the habit where I go to Ajax instead of Clio. I still go to Clio to look up something client specific, but if I'm dealing with time, it's Ajax that I go to. And so I've been able to, like I said, move faster where I'm not stopping each time. And one thing I do really like about it that I wasn't able to do when it was just me manually inputting to Clio is that I can toggle between tasks. Like for instance, I use a lot of AI in my practice. So I'll, load a prompt, load some documents, set the AI running. And, while I'm working on that, I've moved to something else and I'm doing that in between. And then I flip back to it and it can follow me. Instead of me having to turn a timer on and off or write down the time or remember, oh, I started at 11:46 and I went to 11:52 and then I switched to this other thing, it captures all that for me. It even captures things that I wouldn't even think to bill, but it picked it up anyways. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I guess I get to bill for that. Sure.
Right, like phone calls or Zoom calls, calendar entries, things like that.
Sure, like little conversations with the team that we have over Teams and that sort of thing. Like I usually don't bill for that sort of thing, but it'll pick up on that and I'll think like, actually, yeah, we did get a substantive thing done. It just wasn't by email, it was by Teams. And then I'm okay with billing with that, but I probably wouldn't have picked that up before.
Okay. Jack, give me some data points on this. I know that your data is very impressive, so you're probably at the edge of your seat to be able to provide this data. But tell us how it went from a substantive perspective.
Are all about ROI. So everybody that has ever started with Ajax, we run a pilot for them before we actually ask them to pay us, just because if it's not finding more billables than you're paying for it, then what are we even doing here? Like, it should be so easy to find extra billables given how many even really competent lawyers like Katy sometimes lose. Like, it's just not hard to lose half of a 0.1 or a 0.1 a day, and that adds up. And there are a lot of people losing way more than that. So, stats-wise, when we ran the Ad Astra pilot, and we did actually 2 cuts of the ROI for you, just sort of to give a longer and longer time period. So this one is over almost 7 full weeks of pilot, so a pretty long period that has, I would say, most of the noise taken out. We found, and this is across a small sample size, it's like 3 users, but 1.7 extra hours per day. Not all of that's all going to be collectible, of course, but if you assume
per
that
user. Per user, that
user
was.
per day, yes. So if you assume that maybe 50%, 30% of that is collectible, we're still talking about, 0.5, 0.7, 0.9 of extra billable time a day. So like you would have to be charging astronomical fees for that not to pay for itself many times over.
Which
Yeah,
I
it
think,
pays for itself in a day, the whole
and
month.
I think on a monthly basis, that winds up being over $12,000 of potential billables per user per month.
Yeah, it's
Right.
$14,500.
Yeah, I was never a math
It's
major,
shown.
so thanks.
It's shown in my bank account. I have definitely seen that. Not that all 14,000 comes in, but even half of that, to your point, right? It makes a big difference. It really does.
What do you feel like is the actual? Do you feel like 50% is like, we can talk about conceptually because I know you have, and I think you had some data on this, Jack, that I asked you to collect as far as how many point ones and point twos additional that they're being captured now versus the previous period of time. Um, how much of that translates in? We can talk about the numbers and how much potential for billables there are, but from your perspective, Katy, what would you say is the actuals that you'll bill against that? Obviously, you see a time entry and you may say, this took us longer than it should have, or we'd like to discount this or make the client feel the warm fuzzies. But what percentage of that actually translates into real numerical value for the firm?
Since it is a lot of little point ones, I would say the percentage is probably pretty high. And it depends on what biller you're talking about. If it's me, I'm probably, I'll write off a point one for a case if that's all I did for the day is just touch it lightly, and the client loves seeing that. Or like for my paralegal, for instance. And one thing she really loved about this is how Ajax fills in the descriptions. Where if she had to serve a full set of discovery, it takes a minute to type out all the names of all of the documents that she just sent. So it does that for her, which is awesome. So that's moving faster. So for her, she's capturing more point ones, and those are more administrative things. And so I'm able to write those off by showing the client that we did the work, and here's your warm and fuzzy feeling that we're not charging for this. But it's also making it so that I'm getting more out of my paralegal because she's not spending time writing these really detailed descriptions of what she did every day. And her point ones and point twos are more than mine because she switches tasks more than I do. So I would say we're capturing at least 50% of that extra 1.7 hours a day, maybe even as high as 70 or so.
That's amazing.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
It is. So, I know that we're having so much fun here, and there is endless amount of content that we could cover with this, but I did want to provide a forum and bring everyone together. I know we're all busy professionals, so thanks everybody for jumping on. Stick on just for a couple more moments because I want to provide a formal wrap up, but I did want to make sure I thanked all of you for your time. Obviously, thank you all for building these platforms so that you could solve these problems that are fairly ubiquitous across law firms. So this is what helps the legal tech community evolve, is folks who are committed to solving a problem. And of course, when you run into issues, like you mentioned, Jack, with capturing time properly, being difficult, and of course, Matt, on your end, talking to clients, especially in the consumer space, and getting them to pay their bills when it may be the most difficult time of their life. Those are both difficult scenarios, but to be committed to the vision and to keep pushing forward and keeping your teams motivated, that's great. So thank you for that. Just to wrap things up, we're looking at, we identified what these constraints were. We made the recommendation to both Callbox and Ajax to solve for the accounts receivable collections issue as well as the time capture issue. Combined, we found an aggregate of about $440,000 in accounts receivables that's been collected over this period of time in our testing period, as well as we have an additional about $14,000 per month of potential time captured that's now being entered that was not previously being captured before, with Katy saying that about 50 to 70% of that actually translating into bills for clients. So this is what the process looks like when you go through and you identify those constraints within your firm. You look for the problems, you look for the symptoms, and then you unpeel the layers of the onion to find the core issue. You put together a strategic plan, you solve for those, and you provide proper change management techniques to make sure that everyone in the firm is able to get the full benefit out of what's happening. So, of course, I will make sure to list everyone's contact info in the live stream. So if you'd like to reach out to both Jack or Matt standalone or on your own, I should say, feel free to do so if you enjoy their platform, or if you're looking for a more comprehensive look at the entire firm as far as the issues that may exist and performing the same diagnostic constraint identification that Katy has, then of course reach out to me directly, and I've got a staff at the ready to help you with that. Obviously, if you have any sort of litigation related issue and you are in San Francisco or Northern California, make sure to hit up Katy. She's one of the best, and she's well respected in her field. So thanks everybody for coming. Any final comments from everybody before we jump?
I just want to say thank you. This was really eye-opening for me. I enjoy running the firm almost as much as I enjoy practicing law, and finding new tools that make it so that we are working smarter, not harder, and we're not only billing more, but we're collecting more on the work that we do. I mean, my job satisfaction has gone up a ton. I bought my dream car. I did. The business bought me my dream car,
Really?
partly because we're getting this extra money.
What we
I
do it
bought
for,
the
yeah.
electric Volkswagen bus, you guys.
Let's
Did
go.
you?
Oh,
Those are
what is that, the
cool,
ID9
actually.
or what is
The
it?
ID
Yeah.
buzz is blue.
Yeah.
So yeah, there has been a significant positive change in my life that's directly translated into like my day to day, which is really nice. So thank you all.
That's
What we
awesome.
do.
Well, if you ever decide to do a countrywide tour in that bus, you let us know. You can pick us all up in sequence.
Honk,
and
honk, I'm coming.
we'll go on tour. We'll take this thing on tour. So,
So
hey,
awesome.
thanks everybody for jumping on, and everyone for watching. And we'll see you on the next one.